Like Thatcher and Cameron, Theresa May was defeated by Europe. Like Pitt the Younger and Gladstone, she was also defeated by the Irish question. Having failed to deliver Brexit, she's been forced out by the men and women in grey suits. She ceases to be Tory leader 2 weeks today and ceases to be Prime Minister when her successor is elected by Tory Party members at the end of July, if the MPs don't stitch it up beforehand. Our political editor, Gary Gibbon, reports now on how Theresa May's premiership came crashing to an end.
For her, the fractious cabinets, Commons defeats, endless mutinies are nearly over. The set was cleared for the announcement. The Prime Minister's Chief of Staff and her husband, putting on brave faces, looked on as Theresa May admitted defeat on her Brexit deal and warned her party there'll be more turmoil if they don't learn lessons from her downfall.
I have done everything I can to convince MPs to back that deal. Sadly, I have not been able to do so. I tried 3 times. I believe it was right to persevere, even when the odds against success seemed high. But it is now clear to me that it is in the best interests of the country for a new Prime Minister to lead that effort. So I am today announcing that I will resign as leader of the Conservative and Unionist Party on Friday the 7th of June. It is and will always remain a matter of deep regret to me that I have not been able to deliver Brexit. It will be for my successor to seek a way forward that honours the result of the referendum. To succeed, he or she will have to find consensus in Parliament where I have not. Such a consensus can only be reached if those on all sides of the debate are willing to compromise.
She quoted Nicholas Winton, who helped refugees escape the Nazis.
He said, "Never forget that compromise is not a dirty word. Life depends on compromise." He was right.
And then this, from the leader criticised for always hiding emotion.
I will shortly leave the job that it has been the honour of my life to hold. The second female Prime Minister, but certainly not the last. I do so with no ill will, but with enormous and enduring gratitude to have had the opportunity to serve the country I love.
Her husband gulped and then, with the team, went inside. The party that forced her out for compromising too far didn't sound like it had brought her message.
Well, I don't think the EU have compromised from the word go.
It's not the time for you to compromise, it's time for them to compromise.
Well, they've had us over a barrel, you know, for 3 years.
I think she had you in mind more than them.
Well, she may have done.
Her compromises will seem to have led us to close to oblivion in the polls.
Enough compromise, you say?
Far too much compromise.
I'm also going to go for it.
At a conference in Switzerland, a camera in the audience caught Boris Johnson confirming again he was running. He added Britain must leave the EU on October 31st, deal or no deal.
We'll be hearing possibly more about that than you necessarily want to hear.
And you can expect to hear that language from most of the candidates for number 10. It's not just him and Dominic Raab, but some who stayed on in the cabinet longer. Some former ministers, maybe the man who told Theresa May she had to go and now might go for her job, Sir Graham Brady. More worried about no-deal Brexit, a smaller tally of candidates, including Michael Gove.
It's going to look a bit like a Ben-Hur movie, a cast of thousands.
This is a very historic day, and you're obviously standing as a candidate to be the next Prime Minister. What would you like to say?
Well, I'll make the announcement on my own candidacy at the appropriate time.
The Foreign Secretary maybe not realising he had just announced his candidacy. Others said they were coming under pressure to run.
Well, I've been really overwhelmed by the support I've had from across the country with people encouraging me to stand. This has really only happened because I voted against the deal when Boris and Dom and David Davis voted for it. And as a result, people have been asking me to stand. To respect what they've said, I need to take very seriously their advice, and I'll decide over the next week.
As the Prime Minister left Westminster for the weekend, some said her problem was that she compromised too little, too late.
She should have realised before a fortnight ago that a cross-party answer was the only problem. Had she started a cross-party approach to the backbenchers of the Labour Party a couple of years ago, I think she would have delivered it. But that's easy for me to say. She drew the short straw, not me, and she's been treated abominably by the party for all her efforts.
There were flowers, saccharine tweets from colleagues who'd forced her out and who must themselves now work out, if not her way, how else does this government deliver Brexit?
And Gary is with me now. Well, she's asking for compromise. From the sound of it, Tory MPs are not really in the mood.
That's right. I mean, however bad you think Theresa May herself was at compromise, it feels as though things are moving in a different direction. The hustings, the whole pressure of a leadership contest is going to make these candidates, I suspect, almost to a man and a woman, say to the Tory Party, we will come out on the 31st of October, after the latest extension, the new date for coming out of the European Union, and if necessary, we'll come out with a deal. I suspect you'll see them, virtually all of them, hardening up that message. And the European election results, when they come out Sunday, Monday, are going to harden that even more, because there are pressures in both main parties at the moment to be more strident, to pick a side, which is what people keep saying when you talk to them, and Labour side and on the Conservative side. And I suspect by the time we get to September, October, the Conservative Party is going to be an awful lot more Brexity, and the Labour Party, by the way, is probably going to be quite a bit more Remainy.
So what actually happens next? I mean, does it definitely go to the members?
It almost certainly does. They'll be very peeved if it doesn't. A few people are talking about maybe just trying to crown one leader, but I don't think that's where things are heading. You're going to have an expanded list of lots and lots of hopefuls, and people sort of just saying, I'm thinking of running for the leadership, just so they get a little sort of parade round the yard and everybody notices them. That will then shrink, I suspect, when we get to actual nominations. There are processes of elimination amongst the MPs balloting here that will start week of June 10th. And then it might take a week, it might make 2 weeks, depending on how gracefully people retire from the contest when it doesn't look like it's really going anywhere. Then 2 names should go to the country and we have a new Prime Minister by the end of July.
Thank you for now. Well, Theresa May's cabinet colleagues have been fulsome in tribute to her on social media, although few have done so in public or on camera. Earlier today, though, I spoke to the Secretary of State for Housing, James Brokenshire, one of the few. I asked him if her exit speech had brought a tear to his eye.
It was really tough watching it, because just knowing Theresa as I do, having worked with her over so many years, I just know how much she's given and just how it's taken such a personal toll. And I think you've got a sense of the person that she really has that passion, that belief, that sense of public duty, which has imbued everything, I think, that as her politics. And yeah, huge sadness at the end on just how much it matters to her to see our country moving forward in a positive way. So yeah, some real sadness.
People who don't feel about her the way you do have said quite the opposite. They said the one time she cried was not over Grenfell or any of the other tragedies that have gone on during her premiership, but when it was her own time up.
I think that sort of misunderstands the person. She can be quite emotional. She can be that sense of passion that shines through when you're working with her.
Just to dwell on what she actually said in Downing Street. I mean, she said people must now compromise. I mean, that's a nerve, isn't it? I mean, she is here today where she is because she didn't compromise earlier.
I think again that's a misreading, because what I think she was saying there is that, across the way here, Parliament, the numbers, the politics there, that hasn't shifted. And therefore, there is a need for compromise if we're to get a vote through that allows us to leave the European Union in a smooth, seamless way with the deal being in place.
But there's a sense in which, and you're echoing it, that she doesn't seem to understand where she's gone wrong. That she still thinks, I did everything I could, I did everything right. If people had agreed with me, Brexit would have happened. It's everybody else's fault. Do you accept that she got this wrong?
What I'd say is that there have been a number of different people in very fixed positions on either side of the argument, where some people will be saying it should all be about no deal, or some people saying, well, actually we should stay within the European Union.
Where do you stand on the successor?
Well, I want to see who is going to come forward. I'm certainly not putting myself forward, just to be clear on this, but what I do want to see is that we have a proper debate of a vision for our country on issues of social justice, on issues of how we can have a positive sense of our proud United Kingdom coming together, a new unionism in that sense where all parts of our United Kingdom have that benefit.
Are you prepared to vote for somebody who would back no deal?
Well, I'm going to sort of hear what the candidates actually say.
You must have a position on the principle.
Well, my principle...
There will be some people advocating no deal.
That's not where
would you rule them out?
I'm advocating that we have a negotiated deal, that we actually have an agreement. Now, of course, the legal default, absolutely, is that if nothing is agreed by the time we get to the 31st of October, then on that basis we're leaving without a deal.
So are you open to persuasion by someone like Boris Johnson? Because that would say a lot.
Well, I'm sort of I'm going to keep my cards close to my chest, if I may, today, Christian, because what I want to do is hear what people are actually saying, because it's about how we can unite our country, and that, I think, does need to have that sense of compromise, rather than taking a very firm decision that it's going to be this that we're definitely going to be adopting.
When you think about the way she has been effectively hounded out of office by some of your colleagues who are sort of standing around us, do you think there has been any misogyny here?
I don't see it in those terms, and indeed, if you look at what the Prime Minister said, she doesn't bear any animus in that way. No, this is a really tough, uncompromising business that we are in government, in politics. So I think that, yes, people will write whatever they write, but that sense of duty, that sense of service, that sense of wanting to do the right thing, that's the Theresa May I know, and it's been a privilege to work alongside her.
James Brokenshire, thank you very much.
Thank you, Christian.
Well, good evening from Downing Street, where earlier this morning the now familiar podium was put in its spot for Theresa May to effectively read the last rites on her premiership. It was such a stark contrast with her first day in office, where she stood in exactly the same spot and promised to govern for everyone, no matter who they were, wherever they came from, and famously to tackle the burning injustices that she felt were holding people in Britain back. And I think on that first day there was a real sense of optimism among some of her Conservative colleagues that this second female Prime Minister might unite Britain in a way that the first, Margaret Thatcher, hadn't. And there was a real sense that perhaps that might be possible. So today, when the podium came out, she stood in exactly the same spot. Theresa May talked again about burning injustices. But whether or not she admitted it to herself, I think many of her colleagues now feel that a combination of her own errors and the party's bitter divisions over Europe have prevented her fulfilling her mission. Our political editor, Gary Gibbon, now on where it all went wrong.
That podium back in Downing Street again today, an image that peppered her premiership, and which MPs came to dread.
We need a general election, and we need one now.
Podium moments in the street or indoors to call a snap election or berate the EU.
Threats against Britain have been issued by European politicians and officials.
The language was always strident, but tough language wasn't matched by political strength or delivery.
A significant number of colleagues did cast a vote against me. All MPs have been willing to say is what they do not want.
That resistance to compromise, she said, brought her to today's podium moment.
I have not been able to deliver Brexit.
But did it have to end like this? 3 months into the job, before Theresa May had met her EU counterparts, she delivered a speech that laid down red lines for the Brexit talks.
But let me be clear. We are not leaving the European Union today to give up control of immigration again. And we're not leaving only to return to the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice.
With no disrespect to her, inevitably on the economic side and on single market and customs union and maybe monetary union questions and the broader economic domain, this was necessarily alien to her. She'd never had an economic portfolio in government. So we had to go very fast at the outset in autumn 2016, trying to take her through those kind of issues. I personally do not think that we had got very far in that process before she took the decision on the red lines and announced what she announced at the party conference. None of the key officials, the Cabinet Secretary, Ollie Robbins, the Sherpa, nor I saw the party conference speech, but it defined the entire strategy.
The idea that I single-handedly devised the red lines and cooked them up in a room with the Prime Minister alone, and nobody knew about that.
Almost verbatim what officials say.
Well, that's for the birds, because there is no way that anybody could ever do that.
10 months after moving into number 10, encouraged by top aides like Nick Timothy, Theresa May tried to capitalise on a poll lead over Labour. Her general election campaign, forever now a model how not to do it.
To see Theresa May, this quite shy person, who's all about actually the party and not about her as a person, sort of touring the country in a coach with her name on the side of it, was just so incongruous, and it could only really have been decided by people who I think had really never met the Prime Minister, or certainly didn't try to get to know her.
Strong and stable leadership. Strong and stable leadership. Strong and stable leadership.
The Prime Minister, Theresa May.
It was completely mad election campaign. This is a politician who absolutely doesn't like being in the spotlight, doesn't like things being all about her.
It's 10 o'clock and we can give you the result of the Joint Broadcasters exit poll, and it predicts only that the Conservatives are the largest party.
That shock-hung Parliament result triggered a deal with the DUP, but Theresa May wasn't reaching out to other parties beyond them. As the talks in Brussels crawled forward, some Brexiteers in her own party felt she was rubbing out the red lines, including the man who'd been her chief of staff. Who did he blame?
Cabinet ministers breathing down her neck, your old friend Philip Hammond, others?
Yeah, I think a little of everything. I mean, I think the politics of the Cabinet, the politics of Parliament, and the way the negotiations have gone in Europe.
Some people say Ollie Robbins became the new Nick Timothy.
Ooh, I think the way people hype up the role of advisors is quite often overdone.
I remember asking her at Chequers at a lunch, will you do what you say you're going to do? And she just looked at me, because I said, I want the truth from you. And she looked at me in the eye and said, Richard, Brexit means Brexit.
It's about a red, white and blue Brexit.
I think she was mimicking us to keep us quiet. I remember many meetings over the last 2 years with my friends and colleagues where we thought, you know, maybe she is going to deliver. We really began to believe.
No deal is better than a bad deal. We will be leaving the European Union. We will be leaving on the 29th of March.
Now, the most cruel would accuse her of lying, which is an appalling accusation to make against a Prime Minister, and particularly one of our party. But certainly came across that way.
But the torrent of government resignations came from both wings of the party she'd worked for since childhood and loved.
So much of this has been about actually not being the person who split and divided the Conservative Party, which has been her life for as many years as anyone can remember. It's her family, it's the things she does on the weekend. I don't think she was ever prepared to pick a side, and she was determined to try and hold the party together. But ultimately, one could argue maybe that was a mission that was sort of doomed to failure.
Which will, to her, be a very tragic event, even more than maybe losing the job.
I think absolutely.
Many talk of Theresa May's long silences. Meetings might end without a summing up. Her thoughts often unreadable.
No, even I told her she must resign to her face, which I sadly had to do not that long ago. She didn't really react at all. I think if someone said that to me and I was a Prime Minister, I might say, what?
There was no facial flicker.
Why do you say that, Richard?
Did she say anything back to you?
No.
It wasn't until 2 years after the general election that she reached out to Labour, a late failed effort that brought her to this moment.
With enormous and enduring gratitude to have had the opportunity to serve the country I love.
Now she hands over the podium. Her party divided and battered. Her mission to deliver Brexit unfulfilled.
Well, for the first time in British history, the next Prime Minister will effectively be chosen by rank-and-file party members when around 120,000 Conservatives elect their new leader. Boris Johnson might be the bookies' favourite, but we've been to find out whether activists agree, as Darshana Soni reports from the Midlands town of Market Harborough.
I will shortly leave the job that it has been the honour of my life to hold. To have had the opportunity to serve the country I love.
Did you feel sorry for her then when you heard her speech?
Yes, I think she's been very good. And I'm so sad that she's decided to go and that nobody's supported her.
It started off by men, but it's ended up with women as well, stabbing her in the back as far as I'm concerned. Yes, yes.
Do you think some of it was because she was a woman?
It could have been. Yes, it could have been. I can't really comment on that in this day and age because you're not allowed to, are you?
Go on, I won't tell you.
OK. But yes, it could have been the weaker sex. We still get back to it, don't we?
You think she had to go?
She had to go.
You didn't have any sympathy for her?
None at all. I'm sorry. She did try for a start, but not now. It's just gone.
The Market Harbour Conservative Club has resided here in the same building since 1912. Many of its patrons are long-standing party members, like Tony Hughes, who used to work in advertising.
You've been a member since 1968, that's a long time. What do you feel now about the state of the party?
I feel a bit angry that they can't agree. That's the trouble. That's what's caused it all. Nobody's agreed with anything.
They've seen plenty of Prime Ministers come and go here, but for the first time, rank-and-file members will have the final vote.
Michael Gove?
No.
Boris Johnson? He's supposed to be the favourite. Sajid Javid?
No. Ah, maybe.
I'd like to see Jacob Rees-Mogg
Okay.
as PM, but I don't think he will be. No chance.
Do you like Andrea Leadsom then?
Well, I think she'll do just as good a job as Theresa's done. Who knows, she might be another Thatcher.
Would you like another Thatcher?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, I would.
I don't think Boris Karloff...
No, Boris Johnson.
Well, I call him Boris Karloff because I don't think he'd be a very good Prime Minister.
Boris Johnson may be the bookie's favourite, but with everything to play for, nothing should be taken for granted.
They're going to have to fight to get my vote because I don't trust any of them.
Darshana Soni, Channel 4 News, Market Harbour.
Well, I'm joined now by two senior Conservative MPs, the Digital and Creative Industries Minister Margot James and the Children and Families Minister Nadhim Zahawi, who is in Oxfordshire. Margot James, is it right that the Conservative Party membership could completely change the direction of this government so that no deal effectively becomes government policy under Boris Johnson or Dominic Raab?
No, I think it's certainly not right. We were elected in, last year, 2016, and we need to keep, honouring that manifesto. I don't think it's up to candidates now to make radical departures in policy. We committed to leaving the European Union, and efforts should continue to be made to arrive at a deal whereby we can do that, but not career off into a no-deal Brexit.
So when Boris Johnson says leave, deal or no deal, on October the 31st, that's totally unacceptable to you?
Well, it's certainly unacceptable to me, and I think it's unacceptable to a great many people in the country as well. So I just think that it's very regrettable that we have to have a change of Prime Minister in the middle of a Parliament, because, as you said in your intro, effectively the Prime Minister is going to be chosen by roughly 100,000 people, assuming we go that far into the contest, who don't, some would argue they don't really represent the majority of Conservative voters, let alone the country as a whole.
Well, if Boris Johnson wins and he is the front runner, in order to become Prime Minister, he has to have the confidence of the House. Dominic Grieve, your colleague, has said he would vote no confidence in that scenario. Would you?
Well, I would rather not get too far ahead of where we are now. Boris hasn't won yet. We haven't even started the contest yet. He hasn't, no one has got the job yet. I think it's
pretty clear you couldn't possibly support
well,
it.
I've always said I could never support the country leaving without a deal. And I and other colleagues have made that position very clear before, the end of March. And I'm sure we would do so again if that unwelcome scenario presented itself.
Let me just turn to Nadhim Zahawi. Now, very interestingly, you've gone from having been a Boris Johnson supporter last time to being a Dominic Raab supporter this time. Why?
Well, I think we need a leader that can get a
a fair deal done with the EU and deliver, I think, uniting the party. So he's got Maria Miller, who voted for Remain, and David Davis supporting him, and someone who's on top of the detail. Dominic Raab really does know everything about the Brexit negotiations, and I think he will deliver that deal. And more importantly, I think he has a vision for the UK which builds on Theresa May's burning injustices. You know, the issue around housing, around the cost of living, around a fairer society. So, you know, I think Dominic will deliver a fairer deal with the EU
but
and
he
a
too is a no
fairer
dealer,
society.
isn't he?
That's why I think he's the right man.
I mean, he too is saying, deal or no deal, we must leave.
Well, he's saying, so on the 29th of March, and I was one of the ministers in the Department of Education because we were a donor department to DEFRA and HMRC, we were ready for no deal. Dominic does not want no deal. He will want a deal that works for the United Kingdom. I'm sure our EU interlocutors are watching what's happening, and they've seen what's happened in Parliament over one part of the deal. So the bulk of the deal, which I have voted for every time because it is a compromise, but it's actually worth compromising. When you have a divorce, you can either divorce in an amicable way or in an acrimonious way, and I think we want to be amicable. That's what he will be taking. But you also have to prepare for WTO Brexit, which the EU itself had contingency plans to prepare for as well, where they said that there would be 9 months, for example, on free movement of haulage across Europe as long as we reciprocate.
What's the difference?
The best way to ensure, Krish, the best way to ensure a good deal is to be able to leave on WTO rules if you had to, not because if you wanted to, if you had to.
Well, I don't know how you unite the party by being a potential no dealer. That's the question. I mean, what's the difference between Dominic Raab and Boris Johnson on Brexit?
Well, I think Dominic is on top of the detail. Dominic understands the issues. There was a documentary on BBC, which was a fly on the wall done by a Belgian television crew that followed Monsieur Barnier and Guy Verhofstadt. And if the one name that kept coming up over and over again was Dominic Raab as the one person who was actually able to be on top of the detail and pushing hard for a fair deal with the EU. And I think Dominic will deliver that fair deal with the EU.
Do you think it is fair for 100,000 Conservative Party members to completely change government policy on Brexit, as is likely to happen with who they choose? Margot James here has just said it isn't.
Well, it's worth your viewers knowing, because I think you haven't actually looked at what the chairman of the party and the board are saying on the way the leadership will be conducted. And one of the things that they've decided on is that the hustings, where the candidates will go before the membership, will also include members of the public who aren't members of the party, who can ask the questions of the candidates.
Yeah, but they don't get a vote.
I think that's a good thing, because it will demonstrate that we are an open party, and the candidates will have to convince not just the members of the Conservative Party, but the rest of the country. And
Well,
we'll
they
see
don't,
that
because
playing
the rest
out
of the country
in
doesn't
this
get a vote.
election. Yes, but you will see the candidates having to actually address the questions from people who aren't members of the party. That's the point I'm making, which I think is a good process to have.
Shouldn't we have a general election then on that principle?
I don't think small businesses, I've been in my constituency today talking to businesses, no business will actually forgive us if we have a general election or even a second referendum, which will take 9 to 12 months, compounding the uncertainty. People want to know. I had a businessman today, a small businessman, say to me, look, I voted for Remain, but I am a Democrat, and I think we should just now decide either we leave with a deal or we leave with a WTO Brexit on the 21st of October.
Just briefly on that, should we have a general election?
Not if we can avoid it. I think it's bad enough that we're having this leadership crisis and leadership election. I agree with Nadeem, businesses want some certainty. They're crying out for a solution that is sustainable to the crisis in which we find ourselves.
Aren't your colleagues actually deciding on who the next leader is going to be based on them keeping their seats? That's the biggest issue in everyone's minds.
Well, I think we've got to get beyond that. I appreciate that a lot of colleagues are exercised about that, but I do feel we've got to try to act in the national interest, which is what Theresa May was trying to do for the last 3 years, by the way. But I do think we've got a duty to our constituents, to business, to find a solution to the Brexit conundrum that does not involve us leaving, crashing out with no deal. And could I just say that in Nadim's remarks about the preparation for Brexit that government departments are doing, that you can't prepare for everything. A lot of businesses have told me there's only so much they can do to prepare. And in any case, even if we were to leave with no deal, we would then face a real deterioration in the amount of investment coming into this country over the long term.
Margot James and Nadeem Zahawi, thank you both very much indeed. Kathy.
Rish, thank you. Well, your two guests there may not want a general election, but Labour is calling for just that, an immediate general election, saying simply choosing another Conservative leader won't solve Britain's problems. Earlier, I spoke to the Shadow Chancellor, John McDonnell, and asked him if there was a general election, would Labour's manifesto include putting any Brexit deal to a second referendum?
We're going to be discussing what will go in that manifesto. We'll use our normal processes. It's obviously going to be an option that we're going to discuss and talk to our members about. It's always been on the table for us in case we needed it, if we couldn't get agreement in Parliament, or to block a no deal or a bad deal. So yes, it's going to be one of those issues that we've now got to really discuss with our members in the drafting of any potential election manifesto.
But obviously there's now a real urgency. I asked you if you personally thought that that promise should be in your manifesto.
Well, I've always said that I wanted to campaign for Remain in the last referendum, and I did. I'm still a Remainer, but we have a democratic process in our party. And so we need to, as we draft that manifesto, go through those democratic processes. We've kept as an option going back to the people. We would prefer to go back to the people in a general election, and in that general election we'll have a manifesto, as I say, which our members themselves will decide upon, and I think there will be a strong pressure to us to be very, very clear about what we think is the best option for the country. And certainly the prospect of a no-deal option that any of the hard Brexiteers that are likely to be elected as Tory Party leaders, I think, is really worrying, and we've got to block that.
Well, what will you do to block the prospect of no deal? Give me an example of how far you will go to block no deal.
Well, what we want now is whoever is the new Conservative leader, I think if they then want to become Prime Minister, I think it behoves them, they have a responsibility to secure a democratic mandate, and that means going back to the people. And I think there'll be a lot of moral pressure on whoever is elected leader of the Conservative Party to actually go to the people. That's the first thing. The second thing, of course, we always have the opportunity of a no confidence motion in Parliament, and we'll explore that.
Is the prospect of averting no deal so important to you that you'll work with your foes, if you like, on the Conservative benches to try and stop that happening?
I think we'll see over the next few weeks in this Tory leadership election a virtual civil war, where many in the parliamentary party will be, first of all, trying to foist upon the party Boris Johnson. Others will be trying to prevent him, and they'll be in conflict with their own associations. So I think we'll see real divisions opening up within the Conservative Party.
Theresa May, in her resignation statement, spoke about the need for compromise. Of course, if Labour had compromised, then you might have got a soft Brexit deal, and you would have completely blocked no deal without having to go through the shenanigans that you're currently involved in.
Well, we did compromise. We set out our proposals around a customs union. We set out our proposals around alignment with the single market, and we were compromising around that, and also the protections. Well, I think we did. We're in 6 weeks of negotiations, and I think we certainly did. And in Parliament, remember, on those different votes, we did vote for a range of options, including the potential of another referendum. So we did compromise.
Have you been in touch with her to express your sympathy for her?
No, but I certainly will do when Parliament resumes. I've been in my constituency all day, but when Parliament resumes, I think you'll find across the whole House there'll be an expression of understanding. You know, politics is a rough game at times, and people do their best, and no one doubts Theresa May's sincerity, and people do their best, but unfortunately, she was not the Prime Minister this country needs.
John McDonnell, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, President Trump's state visit to the UK will coincide with Theresa May's last days as Tory leader. As details of the trip were released this afternoon, Mr. Trump, of course, was no fan of Mrs. May's Brexit plan, and he made that perfectly clear. So let's go live now to our international editor, Lindsay Hilson, in Washington, D.C. Lindsay.
Kathy, Cathy, President Trump, like so many others, undermined Mrs. May when she was in power and then was magnanimous in her defeat. This is what he said today.
I feel badly for Theresa. I like her very much. She's a good woman. She worked very hard. She's very strong. She decided to do something that some people were surprised at, some people weren't. It's for the good of her country. But I like her very much. In fact, I'll be seeing her in 2 weeks.
I think that will be a difficult visit. The relationship started out well. She scuttled over to Washington soon after he was inaugurated, and people will remember how they held hands as they walked down the stairs. She was strong and stable. He was, as he puts it, the very stable genius. But he reserves particular humiliation for female leaders. She was no exception. On his official visit, he said that he had given her advice on how to negotiate Brexit. Very patronising. Later, she said that his advice was that she should sue the European Union. And he then said that Boris Johnson would make a very good Prime Minister. So I think that the meetings when he comes for the state visit, which incidentally, he's made it clear what he's interested in is all of his children meeting the Queen rather than Theresa May. I think it's going to be pretty awkward.
Well, how do you think he'll get along with her likely or the favourite to succeed her, Boris Johnson?
He has said in the past that Boris Johnson is his friend, and they have similar styles. It's not just the hair. They have, you know, indeterminate ideology, but appeal to the right wing. They're very populist. They wing it. They don't have very sort of clear policies. But anybody who succeeds Theresa May will find it difficult to deal with President Trump, because what they will want is a trade deal with America. President Trump doesn't like trade deals. And he doesn't really like allies that much either. He's not really bothered about who's his friend or not. In the end, it's America first, that's all. And that's what anybody who succeeds Theresa May will find out.
It's going to be very interesting to observe. Lindsay, thanks very much. Well, there's been a mixed response from European leaders to Theresa May's impending departure, with Spain warning it's bad news because it makes a hard Brexit more likely. While the European Commission chief, Jean-Claude Juncker, said he viewed her resignation without personal joy. Let's go live now to our Europe editor, Matt Fry, who's in Rome. Matt.
Well, good evening to Rome, Cathy. Of course, they've got their own political turmoil here with European elections that are imminent. But let's first talk about the reaction to Theresa May. I have to say, across the European Union, there was respect for her, tribunes for her, but very polite and not necessarily always heartfelt. Remember, she was the difficult woman trying to, sell an impossible deal to her own parliament. And the one thing that has made all European leaders, including the populists here in Rome, really allergic is that they feel that the whole of Europe, whatever their rhetoric might be, is somehow dependent on the internal wranglings and turmoils and entrails of the Tory Party. It has ever been thus, and this is the latest chapter of that. Now, I spoke to a couple of senior people in Brussels this evening who said, OK, this is bad news because we're going to get a hard Brexit now. If Boris Johnson, should he be the new man, thinks he can renegotiate the Brexit withdrawal agreement, forget about it. We're not going to yield to any pressure. And by the way, they said, the European elections will be out of the way in October. So President Macron, for once, will feel much freer to tell the Brits to go where they should go. And at the same time, of course, and this is interesting, if Nigel Farage's Brexit party does really, really well, and we're landed with 30 MEPs of his ilk in the European Parliament, well, guess what? They won't be around if you leave with a hard Brexit at the end of October. And that we see very much as a silver lining in all this. Now, getting back to the reason why we're here in Rome is that, of course, they've got these elections, and Rome is really the sort of laboratory chamber of nationalist populism versus globalism. Matteo Salvini, the Deputy Prime Minister, sees himself as the Instagramming tribune of this new kind of alt-right politics that is taking Europe to some extent by storm. And his big friend and mentor is one Steve Bannon. Now, we made a very surprising discovery about 2 hours south of Rome. Watch. Clinging to the remote hills 2 hours south of Rome is the monastery of Trisulti. It's been here for 800 years, largely ignored by the rest of the world, until today. This has become an unlikely flashpoint in the political battles shaping Europe and the West, and Benjamin Harnwell is unlike any other Englishman abroad.
Hello.
Matt, hi, welcome, do come in.
Thank you very much.
He's almost the sole resident of this warren of cloisters, chapels and monk cells. He, a single remaining friar, and a band of feral cats. A Catholic convert and born-again Eurosceptic who worked for years at the European Parliament. Harnwell has been installed here by his friend and mentor Steve Bannon. Yes, that Steve Bannon. And the blood-curdling artwork chimes with their view of the world.
This painting and this painting have a parallel. Here are the Jews being massacred in the Old Testament. This is the massacre of Christians, of Catholics. These two things come perfectly together to inspire us with this Academy for the Judeo-Christian West.
Defending the Judeo-Christian West, a rallying cry ringing through the far right in Europe and America. Bannon, who is obsessed with the concept, pays the 100,000 euros rent a year for this monastery, apparently out of his own pocket, and together they have a plan.
This is the global headquarters of the fight to defend the Judeo-Christian West.
You're being serious?
I'm 100%, yeah.
This place here?
Yeah, yeah. I know it's great for the media to come in and say, had this idea that we're doing some far-right training camp, and all, you know, in the locals.
But it was Steve Bannon who used the word Gladiators Academy.
Sure,
What do you mean by that?
So what Steve is saying, in these culture wars, if we want to save the West, we're not going to be doing it by just sort of sitting back drinking tea and living nice, tranquil lives. We've got to fight. We've really got to fight hard with that kind of concentration and focus.
With ideas and words or anything else?
Well, of course, with ideas and words, right?
It's hard to know where self-parody ends and reality begins, but the siege mentality echoing through these walls is the bread and butter of Europe's populist nationalists, and that includes the UK.
I mean, the UK is a secular country, right? But it's starting to bend the knee to Sharia law, and that is concerning.
You know that's not true.
It's 100% true, yeah.
Nah, come on, that's just rubbish.
Rubbish, but with foreboding resonance in European politics today.
Steve Bannon and his friends Marine Le Pen and Matteo Salvini are very keen to portray these European elections as an existential battle between the forces of globalism on one side and the forces of nationalist populism on the other. But what they hadn't reckoned on in this place here are the forces of Italian localism.
Just down the road from the monastery is the town of Collepardo, a place that feels left behind by Rome and by Brussels, where they didn't even bother to put up election posters. A place where the ideas from the monastery should find a welcome ear.
Gliel'ho detto, penso male, se ne devono solo andare, che la certosa è nostra, non è di loro.
Gli americani non hanno niente da fare qua?
No, se ne devono solo andare, se ne devono andare all'America.
Cioè il perché, diciamo, un politico americano sia interessato alla nostra certosa e risulti.
Vi sembra strano?
Sì, sinceramente sì.
Vedendo sempre i monaci dentro, insomma, è tutta una cosa nuova, cambiata.
Che comunque per Collepardo è una cosa di turismo,
sì.
porta tanto lavoro anche ai commercianti di Collepardo.
If the academy ends up bringing jobs and money, even the locals may well be won over. But the fortunes of this monastery and its wannabe gladiators will also reflect what happens beyond these hills, in the culture wars now shaping the future of the West.
Now, Theresa May made much of her record on inequality and race relations today, evoking the Grenfell inquiry and equal pay as she described her political legacy. But to many of her critics, she was the architect of the so-called hostile environment policy, the notorious go-home vans and the Windrush scandal. She was said recently by a former colleague to be preoccupied by immigration. But Mrs May started out as something of a liberal reformer, warning the Tories against being the nasty party. Simeon Brown reports.
That means fighting against the burning
This is where it all started.
If you're black, you're treated more harshly by the criminal justice system than if you're white.
And this is where it ended.
It is why the race disparity audit and gender pay reporting are shining a light on inequality, so it has nowhere to hide.
If Brexit was her failure, she hailed fighting racial inequality as her success. So what's the verdict? Before taking office, Theresa May was one of the longest-serving Home Secretaries of the post-war era, where she fought the police to limit excessive use of stop and search.
If you do not change of your own accord, we will impose change on you.
A display of strength she continued with. Theresa May launched a review on deaths in police custody and met the families of Olaseni Lewis and Sean Rigg. Both men suffering mental ill health died after police restraint, and the Black Lives Matter protests against police use of force came to the UK.
Race was missing from your speech. Do Black Lives matter?
Well, the reason that I have asked for this review and set up this review on deaths and serious incidents in custody is because what has happened to people in custody does matter.
So Theresa May's legacy for me will be the person that I knew a long time ago. The person who wanted an inclusive, diverse community. A person that recognised that there were a lot of issues within the Conservative Party that needed to be dealt with head on. And that's why I was really disappointed when we saw those white vans with that nasty immigration message.
Those go-home vans were part of a campaign to create a hostile environment for migrants without documents. Immigration is now viewed as a major part of Theresa May's legacy on race. Her former colleague Anna Soubry said the PM was obsessed. The Grenfell tragedy sparked a national debate about how migrants and working class people live. The PM was criticised for her inability to connect. After a delayed visit, this is how the community felt about her. And then there was the Windrush scandal, which left black British citizens detained, facing deportation, and denied them their legal rights. Campaigners are still fighting for adequate compensation.
She said that she was going to tackle racial inequality and the burning injustice facing black and minority people in Britain. We can safely say that she failed on that, because we had a hostile environment with the Windrush scandal, which caused and blighted people, one of the biggest abuses of human rights affecting British people.
For many in Brixton, there's no doubt what Theresa May's legacy is. And now this statue, first unveiled ahead of the 70th anniversary of Windrush, has taken on added significance. This monument embodies the contribution that racial diversity and multiculturalism has made to Britain's past. But as the PM departs under pressure from those on the right of her party, the question is, what role will these values play in Britain's future?
Well, joining me now, Caroline Slowcock, who has written about the final days of Mrs Thatcher's premiership, which she witnessed as her private secretary in her book, People Like Us, Margaret Thatcher and Me. The Labour Party advisor turned comedian, Aisha Hazarika, and Fraser Nelson, the editor of The Spectator. Caroline Slowcock, as you saw Theresa May's cracking emotion today, did it take you back?
It certainly did, you know, the pain of it. I mean, I think it's time for her to go, but and I don't defend her record, but I do feel for her personally. I think the thing for women is that it's hard to show emotion, it's hard to show vulnerability. People think that, you know, women are being emotional if they do that. She was obviously trying to hold it in, she's very private, and there she was, her voice cracking. Margaret Thatcher also cried on the day she announced her resignation in Cabinet. When she went to see the Queen, you know, when the door closed behind her in number 10, she broke down in tears. But she didn't show it in public. And, you know, I think for Theresa May it was a terrible moment, and you could actually see the glimpse of the real woman, I think, behind the mask.
And who knows what happened when she did go back in the door?
I'm sure she would have been devastated.
But Fraser Nelson, I mean, it's been pretty poor, hasn't it, to see these sort of sympathetic tributes to Theresa May from people who've been trying to knife her for months.
Well, not really. I think it's possible to separate your sympathy for a person and their stamina and courage from the professional record, which you can deplore. And I think today, you've seen lots of people who've been calling for her to go for a long time, paying tribute to her personal characteristics. But you know, if Margaret Thatcher had left a year earlier, her story would have worked out a lot differently. If Theresa May had come to this conclusion and realised that she couldn't go any further 6 months ago, then we could be in a far better place now.
Is the Conservative Party going to become the no-deal party in the course of this leadership election?
No deal is going to get put back on the table by whoever wins the election. Yes, that is going to happen. But that isn't such a big change. That was government policy until a few months ago.
Except she didn't really mean it.
Oh, she didn't mean it, and I suspect the new Tory Party leader will actually mean it. And the hope is that we are actually far closer to a deal with the EU than a lot of people think. And if the EU believe that we're serious about leaving without a deal, then they might go a little bit, we might be able to get a compromise. Whoever wins will want a compromise with the EU. They're not going to want to without a deal as the first choice. That's only a means to getting what they really want, a deal.
But do you think we are now looking at a much higher risk of no-deal Brexit at the end of October?
I don't think it's much higher, actually, because I don't think the EU wants that. It's not common sense. Why would the EU and Britain go into a no-deal solution when a compromise is so within grasp? So I just think a new leadership, and also not just in London, but in Brussels as well. Europe went to the polls yesterday. There's going to be a new European Commission coming in later on this year. So I'm quite optimistic about the chance of success.
Aisha Hazarika, I mean, if Boris Johnson or Dominic Raab wins and sort of full steam ahead for no deal if needs be, does Labour become the Remain party?
Well, I would hope so. I hope that these Euro elections, let's see what the results are, but certainly when I was on the doorstep, the Labour Party was getting an absolute kicking from people. I spoke to Labour supporters that want the Labour Party to be a Remain party, to back a second referendum without any equivocation. So I think the fault lines are going to be very clear going forward when we come to the next general election. Brexit is going to be dominating the political landscape, and it is going to be a party of no deal, hopefully, versus a Labour Party, which will be a party of Remain. But I think the other thing we've got to look out for is, I think, an increasing polarisation in politics. We already have a Labour Party, which many feel... Well, yes, I think it could be. Yes, it could. Okay. Look, I think with Boris Johnson, if he does win, we're going to see kind of a Trumpian nature of politics. He's already sort of cozied up to Steve Bannon. He will probably try and do a deal with Nigel Farage, with the Brexit Party. So I think you are going to see this very, very extreme polarisation in British politics.
And who do you think is going to win?
I think Boris Johnson's going to win.
Do you agree with that, Fraser?
Boris is quite capable of self-destruction, as we found out last time around. We were sitting in the exact spot saying, oh, Boris has just won a campaign, of course he's going to win, but Boris can implode. And normally whoever the front-runner in the Tory leadership does. But right now, if he gets to the membership, there is no contest between him and any other candidates.
I mean, I don't think Boris Johnson can unite the country, and I think there are real question marks over his competence. But I think we should also just look at this process. You know, when Margaret Thatcher resigned, she was gone in less than a week. You know, as soon as she'd said the word, she stopped doing her boxes. All eyes turned away from her. You know, government stopped. You know, how long are you going to take on this decision? You know, and what's going to happen to the country in the meantime?
I think it could go on beyond that.
Yeah.
And I mean, look, it's astonishing to think that 48 hours ago, British Steel, one of the biggest manufacturing sort of, bits of our heritage, there's 25,000 jobs on the line. That would normally be dominating the news cycle, but that's like gone and forgotten. There's so many things, whether it's housing, whether it's schools, and I think people are so frustrated in the sense that now Brexit just carries on in this Brexistential crisis, and now we're going to have the circus of the Tory leadership contest.
You know, and so I think that the Tory party's in denial, and I'd just like to pick up on what Fraser said, about women. I mean, I think the Tory party's also in denial about how it treats its female leaders. You know, to lose one prime minister, sitting prime minister, to bring her down, might seem as a one-off. To do it twice, I think, is a pattern. And you get this sort of chauvinistic pattern in the Conservative Party where, everybody speaks very nicely about these female leaders, says very nice words for them when they go, but you still get people talking about that knife that's being heated and twisted in the front.
The Tory party did put two of them in power in the first place, which is more than any other party has done.
Open doors to these women very nicely.
Yes, which is more than the Labour Party.
But can I also just say one thing? It's not. Being a female leader is not just about getting yourself the top job. It's what's your legacy? How do you help other women? And I'm afraid with the Windrush scandal and all the others, and think about the women in Northern Ireland on abortion. Where's Theresa May as her "I'm a feminist"? Why didn't she help those women?
She has worn the feminist T-shirt.
We've got to leave it there. Thank you all very much indeed for joining me. That's all we have time for tonight.